Hi. I'm sorry. I didn't want to wake you up. You weren't asleep? Just dozing? Okay. How are you feeling? Any better? A little? That's good. I'm so sorry that you got sick. Oh, it's okay. There will be other class trips you can take. Yes, I'm sure we'll be fine. Hey, while I'm here, do you mind if I take your temperature real quick? Just to make sure your fever is going down. Okay. Show me your ear. You're still a little warm, but it has gotten better. Are you feeling hungry? No. Can make you a snack, an apple, some crackers. No? Okay. I think maybe you just need some more sleep. Sleep is the best medicine when you have a cold. I love you, sweetie. Come on, let's shake out your pillow. Yes, I knew. It's very soft. Where's Mr. Barrington? Oh, there he is. Hello, Mr. Barrington. He's looking out for you. Yes, he should. You're sick after all. When you're sick, you need someone to protect you. Mr. Barrington is taking care of you, just like I am. Okay. Try and get some sleep. A story. You want a story now? Well, I can never say no to you. Let's see. Where's your storybook? There it is. Okay. How about we read the story about Clumsy Beauty and her ants? Okay. Snuggle close. Don't worry. I won't get sick. And if I do, then we can be sick together. Okay. There was once a poor widow with a daughter named Ursula, who was as beautiful as a spring day, but as clumsy as could be. The poor mother was the most industrious person in the town, and was a particularly good hand at the spinning wheel. It was her greatest wish that her daughter should be as handy as herself, so that she would find a good husband. But any work Ursula touched seemed to tangle or break in her fingers at once. One morning, things were very bad, for Ursula had tried her hand at spinning once again, and once again had tangled the thread. Her mother was giving her a good scolding, when who should be riding by their small farm but the king's own son. oh, dear, good woman," he said. "You must have a very bad child to make you scold so terribly. Sure it can't be this handsome girl who's vexed you." Now the widow knew the prince was in need of a wife, and she quickly devised a plan. "Oh, please, your majesty." "Not at all," she said. "I was only checking her for working herself too much. Would your majesty believe it? She spins 3 pounds of flax in a day, weaves it into linen the next, and makes it all into shirts the day after." "Gracious," said the prince. "Then she's the very lady that will catch my mother's eye, for she herself is the greatest spinner in the kingdom. Will you fetch your daughter's bonnet and cloak, please, madam, and set her behind me on my horse? Why, my mother will be so delighted with her that perhaps she'll allow us to marry within the week. That is, of course, if the young lady herself is agreeable." The woman bundled Ursula into her bonnet and cloak and sent her off with the prince before the girl could even protest. But as they rode back to the castle together, the prince was so solicitous and kind that she almost forgot her fear of being found out. When they arrived at the castle, the queen came out to meet her son, and was almost struck dumb when she saw a young country girl sitting behind him. But when they dismounted, and she saw the girl's handsome face, and heard about her incredible feats of spinning, her feelings changed quite quickly. Ursula trembled under the queen's gaze, but the prince whispered in her ear that if she didn't object to becoming his wife, she should strive to please his mother, so she smiled bravely and made a wobbly curtsy. That evening they all dined together, and the prince and Ursula were getting fonder and fonder of one another. But the thought of spinning still sent a chill to her heart. And sure enough, after they had feasted, the queen led Ursula to a beautiful bedroom, pointed to a heap of fine flax in the corner, and said, "You may begin as soon as you like tomorrow morning, and I'll expect to see these 3 pounds in nice thread the morning after." Then she bid Ursula good night. Uh-oh. The poor girl slept little that night, and when she was left alone the next morning, she began her spinning with a heavy heart. Though she had a nice mahogany wheel and the finest flax she'd ever seen, the thread seemed to break every time she touched it. One moment it was fine as a cobweb, and the next as coarse as wool. At last she pushed her chair back, let her hands fall into her lap, and burst out crying. Just then a small old woman with surprisingly big feet appeared before her as if out of nowhere, and said, "What ails you, you handsome girl?" "Oh," cried Ursula, "haven't I all that flax to spin before tomorrow morning, and I'll never be able to have even 5 yards of fine thread of it put together. And would you think it bad to ask poor Collie Coshmore to your wedding with the young prince? If you promise to invite me, all 3 pounds of your flax will be made into the finest of thread while you're taking your sleep tonight." Ursula was overjoyed. "Indeed, you must be there and welcome, and I'll honor you all the days of your life." "Very well," said Collie Coshmore. "Stay in your room till tea time, then tell the queen she may come in for her thread as early as she likes tomorrow morning." Ursula did as she said, and the old woman, was as good as her promise. The next morning, Ursula woke to find thread finer and evener than the gut of fly fishers. "What a brave girl!" cried the queen. "I'll get my own mahogany loom brought to you, but you needn't do anything more today. Work and rest, work and rest. That's my motto. Tomorrow you'll weave all this thread, and who knows what may happen," she added with a smile. So Ursula spent another day with the prince, and she was so happy in his company that she almost forgot the task ahead of her. But the next morning, when she sat down at the queen's loom, she was even more frightened than before. Her trembling fingers couldn't even put the warp in the gears, nor use the shuttle. She was sitting there in the greatest grief, when a little old woman with mightily white hips suddenly appeared before her. She said her name was Colliach Crommenmore, and she offered the same bargain as Colliach Coshmore. Eagerly, Ursula accepted. And great was the queen's pleasure the next morning, when Ursula showed her linen as fine and white as the finest paper. "What a darling girl," said the queen. "Take your ease with the ladies and gentlemen today. If you have all this made into nice shirts tomorrow, you may present one of them to my son, and be married to him out of my hand." Oh, how poor Ursula trembled the next day as she sat with scissors, needle, and thread in hand. She was so near the prince now, and yet maybe would be soon so far away from him. But she waited patiently till a minute after noon, an old woman with a big red nose appeared before her. The woman introduced herself as Colliach Crommenmore, and she made the same offer as the two before her. Ursula accepted with relief, and sure enough, when the queen paid her an early visit the next morning, there were a dozen fine shirts lying on the table. The wedding took place a few days later, and it was exceedingly grand. Ursula's mother was there along with the rest, and at the wedding dinner the queen could talk of nothing but the lovely shirts and how happy she and the bride would be after the honeymoon, when they would be spinning and weaving and sewing shirts without end. The bridegroom didn't much like the conversation, and the bride liked it less, but before either could interject, a footman came up to the head of the table and said to the bride, "Your ladyship's aunt, Colliach Coshmore, bade me ask if she might come in." The bride blushed and wished she were 7 miles under the floor, but she nodded. And the prince said, "Tell Miss Coshmore that any relation of my bride's will always be heartily welcomed wherever she and I are." In came the woman with a big foot, and she got a seat near the queen. But the queen, who didn't like the interruption, soon asked rather spitefully, "Dear madam, what's the reason for your foot is so big?" "Faith, your majesty," said Colliach Coshmore, "I was standing almost all my life at the spinning wheel, and that's the reason." "I declare to you, my darling," said the prince, horrified, "I'll never allow you to spend 1 hour at the same spinning wheel." A little while later, the footman approached again and said, "Your ladyship's aunt, Colliach Crommenmore, wishes to come in, if you have no objection." The prince and Ursula said she was welcome, and she took her seat and drank healths aplenty to the company. But after a minute, the queen said, "May I ask, madam, why you're so wide halfway between the head and the feet?" "That, your majesty, is owing to sitting all my life at the loom," said Collier Crommenmore. "By my sceptre," said the prince, "my wife shall never sit there an hour." Finally, the footman approached again and said, "Your ladyship's aunt, Collier Crommenmore Ra, is asking leave to come into the banquet." Again, the bride and bridegroom said she was welcome, and in came the old woman and settled herself at the table. "Madame," said the queen, "will you tell us, if you please, why your nose is so big and red?" "Troth, your majesty, my head was bent down over the stitching all my life, and all the blood in my body ran into my nose," said Collier Crommenmore Ra. "My darling," said the prince in all seriousness to Ursula, "if I ever see a needle in your hand, I'll run 100 miles from you." And in this way, the clumsy Ursula was relieved of spinning work for the rest of her life, and she and the prince were happily married at last. What a lucky girl. No, I sew a lot too, and I crochet, and I knit, and nothing like that ever happens. And even if it did, there's nothing wrong with having a big foot, or big nose, or wide hips. Lie down. I will go get you another cup of tea, and it's time to sleep. Okay, tuck in. I'll be back in a minute.